Most of our remaining inhabitants are now retired and ageing and require daily visits from home helps and nurses, who also come fueled by petroleum spirit because there is a huge lack of neighbours who could provide the service fueled by community spirit. With such a dense rural population possible, all of the little nearly abandoned hamlets that housed pre-war and post-war life, because we were 1,800 people in our village just after the war, all that would re-flourish and expand rather dramatically. And to bring life up to this level, there would of course be a lot of building going on to house all of these new farmers and the associated produce transformers and all the other trades that would flourish within the niches. We would then have to build dairies, oasts, barns, stables, slaughterhouses, schools, libraries, pubs, theatres, shops, sawmills, hydroelectric generators, wind turbines, grain mills, looms, oil presses, paper mills, tanneries. Sorry, did somebody say there was an unemployment problem? Or we could have less habitants than our production level could sustain and export a diverse excess to nearby towns and cities. In either case, our nearly dead village centre would suddenly become a very small and thriving market town, all based on natural production techniques, good health, a neighbourly atmosphere, and to all intents and purposes, a kind of local sovereignty within the pattern of the tree. Economic protectionism needs to begin at the lowest levels, from the household to the neighbourhood and even to the village. It is much safer across the board to have a strong village identity rather than having a strong national identity. Villages, when they fall out, have tug-of-wars and cricket matches to work out their differences, whereas nations tend to build nuclear weapons. If any produce leaving the village was taxed, and I'm suggesting that life within the village be as tax-free and money-free as possible, with local free trade, bartering, local currencies, gifting, etc., the exporting of produce out of the village would finance each village's internal infrastructure. It's VAT, but instead of it being value added tax, it is village attributed tax, and it would need no or little enforcement or administrators either. If you were fully aware that the sale of your goods outside of the village boundary was taxed, and that this money was directly used to make your village a better place, and that you also had the right of decision in how that money was used because your village is a participative democracy, well, you would consider it as being your money and therefore be very scrupulous in applying it to outsiders wishing to buy your goods. Again, once the pattern is right, it should all flow nicely. The words free and trade have become badly tainted as they have been applied to the macro level only, and the complete opposite is enforced down here on the micro level. Don't forget, babies and bathwater all the way through. If the them apply it to themselves up there, chances are it's worth having a good look at it before binning the idea, excepting of course that paedophilia thing that they all seem to be into up there. The way in which they have applied free trade up there is an ecological and humanitarian catastrophe, of course. Again, all the solutions are there, they're just all upside down and completely deliberately. Now, seeing as our regional landscape here is absolutely infested with hills and small rivers, all hosting abandoned mills, our energy needs would most probably be fulfilled and also exportable. Now, leaving the village and going towards the trunk of the pattern into towns, we need to get more and more complicated. At the moment, towns and cities are literally bleeding rural areas dry of resources and humans, and the lack of eyes on the landscape means that the few who are left, that's that 50 big polluting farmers instead of 500 regenerative ones, our pattern actually stops at order 3 or 4. We have the trunk, and we have the first 3 levels of branches, but we have no small branches, no twigs, and no leaves. Now, next time you take your car out to burn off some excess prehistoric sunlight, keep an eye out for a dead tree on the landscape. Once a tree gives up the ghost, the pattern simplifies itself in reverse order. The leaves and the twigs fall back rather quickly, and as time goes on, we have this simplified skeletal pattern of a trunk and a few branches standing starkly against the sky and or foliage of its neighbours. Our society is about at this stage. It is already dead, and the pattern is collapsing in on itself. And it is up to us to now step out and grow new trees before the old one falls down for good, or just becomes a hollow, dry shell full of desperados, a bit like what was portrayed in Australian apocalyptic cinema productions of the 1980s. Please don't panic about the Mad Max innuendo either. We are a lot more numerous than anybody would believe. There are lots of us already out or partially out of the pyramid and growing new trees everywhere. We are present and active in rural and urban areas across the globe, or plain of course, and growing this new tree without dogma, without a leader, without government subsidies, without government permission, and mostly without their knowledge, although we are struggling to do this within the ridiculous rules that they keep writing to stop us living decently. We find that there is no point in giving them a reason to come smashing the door down, although that does happen from time to time as well. So, on to towns and cities, passing by culture on the way. Despite all of its concrete and hardware, a city is not dead. Listening to all my bucolic hobbitish dreamery, one could be forgiven for thinking that I don't like towns. Now this is wrong. Towns and cities are very necessary, especially for developing high culture. In the rural areas, we will only be able to develop a rural culture. So before we get carried away, let's just look at that first so that we all understand what we're talking about. Largely pragmatic and in key with geology, climate and means of production, our rural culture will be a direct reflection of the territory on which we live as it once used to be. This should eventually go on to stimulate the identification of what we will go on to call bioregions. Now, our counties and regional boundaries are often still a reflection of this, but not always, and a great example of this is at the southern end of the region in which I live. Or I should say used to live, as the powers that be did recently redraw all the lines during the middle of the night at one point last year, and we woke up the next day as citizens of a new mega region that has to tax us even further to pay for more politicians we didn't ask for, to make up a regional parliament nobody bloody needs, covering what was once 4 smaller regions that were already way too big to be administered humanely. There was a lot of confusion at this time over the school holidays and when they were to start and finish. So my former region consists of 3 departments, or what we call in English counties. One is very, very empty of people, consists largely of a cow and timber economy, and is the highest above sea level and the coldest of the 3. It also has good mining potential and is actually under threat of being strip mined as we speak. The one in which I live is a mostly cow economy, but has a very lively departmental and regional capital city, famous for its porcelain. The third is the southernmost of the 3 and has a cow, timber and rather toxic apple economy and an administrative centre. Now at the southernmost tip of this last department, the motorway runs through a thickly wooded plateau and then drops over the edge of a very steep hill down into what is called the Breve Basin. The geology here at the landscape suddenly changes from granite and shale to limestone and sandstone. The weather is suddenly hotter and drier and the soil is thinner and stonier. The trees are short, twisted, gnarly affairs, struggling either to root into the rockscape, resist annual drought, or maintain their place against the wind. Up top and throughout the rest of the region, the trees are immense pillars of living wood, in the presence of which one can feel their peaceful and majestic, deep-rooted satisfaction in all things tree-ish. The stone used for building also suddenly changes, and down below in the plain we have clean sawn sandstone and limestone blocks with predominantly red tiled roofs, whereas up top we have cobbled together stone walls made of assorted shale and granite, and the predominant roofing material was thatch and is now either flat brown clay tiles or dark slate. The pitch of the roofs is suddenly steeper up top to drop heavy snowfalls before the excess weight breaks the carpentry, and down below in the basin the overhanging eaves are a lot shorter to offer less purchase to the buffeting winds. The systematic installation of iron bars across ground floor windows curiously begins down below at Breve and continues south all the way to the Mediterranean Sea. So you see, despite our being contained within the same imaginary perimeter, we could very easily cut the town of Breve and its basin out of our bioregion and place it in the next bioregion where it fully belongs, and I believe that all concerned would probably feel a lot better about it. You see, if we drew these imaginary administrative lines along real natural lines, it would at least make some sense. All of these fundamental indicators can be used to help us identify a bioregion's culture, along with regional products, clothing materials, woodworking styles, tools and techniques, etc. Songs, artwork, dance and language spring forth from the physical character of life in symbiosis with the territory, and as we move into more concentrated areas of population density, the possible niches in the humanosphere go up, and higher, more sophisticated reflections of this culture emerge. These are the veritable cultures we are looking for, and not all this garbage about street theatre grants and dying opera houses. In a slower, healthier, happier world where every deserted village of today suddenly has the population of a small market town, a street theatre troupe would be able to drift from town to town quite ecologically, and they would be welcomed, fed, lodged, well appreciated by all the villagers who are always waiting for the next cultural arrivals, and so our travelling performers could harvest hatfuls of cash before wearing out their welcome with random precision and moving on to the next village. It would be the same for opera and theatre in town if we could return to the slower, non-industrial culture of before. Cinema is great, but its capacity to be distributed en masse has also become a dominating menace that means that opera houses need lottery grants to remain alive. If industrial culture was regulated in the same way all industry needs regulating, natural, live culture would be able to flourish and stand its ground. Again, we've got it upside down. We allow the cheap, destructive shit to run rampant, and then we try to subvention the good. And subventioning the good, of course, means deciding what and who receives money, and we save forms of culture selected by political whims, and this is definitely not a good idea. We see the same problem with food and everything else across all levels, and industrially produced food is the biggest fucking criminal of all because it is highly subsidised by the EU and the World Social Dumping Programme. I mean, how is it possible that local organic growers like me are more expensive than green beans grown in Kenya? Buying from local producers is a political act, and one that promptly empties the pockets. And this brings us back to why we need the shit tax to protect all local cultures on all levels. Even if we simply threw a massive tax on oil to keep it in the ground and use it sparingly, the playing field would level out just a bit. And this kind of policy, yet again, gets a lively knee-jerk reaction from the fucking left, who proclaim that this would be detrimental to the poorest people in the system. But looked at holistically and as part of a whole solution, this set of policies actually gives the poor the opportunity not to be poor anymore, and in more ways than just their bank balance. And the left can't actually see any further than the fact that without the poor and the lowly factory worker, they would probably have no voters and no need to exist. So, back to bioregions. Without using the term specifically, we do associate Yorkshire with sheep, dry stone walls, rolling fields, not forgetting rolling clouds, and bizarrely tea. Or we associate Cornwall with pasties, beaches, viciously intelligent seagulls, clotted cream, small whitewashed fishing villages, tin mines, rolling clouds, and bizarrely tea. With misplaced modern media, and especially oil, all of this cultural identity gets eroded as quickly as our soils and forests do, and the word culture gets associated with subsidising art galleries and failing theatre grants because the idea of culture isn't cheap or thrilling enough. Most of our remaining inhabitants are now retired and